Hello, Internet. Today we're going to start discussing a big topic in cell membranes. Last time we talked about phospholipids, which make up most of the basic material of the membrane, most of the skin. But proteins, cell membrane proteins, are a very diverse group of things that stick through membranes and do a lot of work for the cells. So I wanted to start with a discussion of what a protein is. Obviously, it's something you eat. Your body makes them also. Amino acids are something you might have heard of. They're something they put in energy drinks, and you've probably heard talk about different amino acids. And then from there, they are very small molecules. They join together to make bigger molecules called peptides, and the peptides join together to make proteins. And proteins are really, really big molecules, and we'll go over this a couple more times in greater and greater detail. So here is the chemical structure of an amino acid called lysine, again with the letters standing for different atoms. So there's an H2N, hydrogen and nitrogen on one end, carbons, hydrogen and oxygen at the top. And then leading downwards from this first carbon, you'll see kind of a tail with a bunch of CH2s and an NH3 at the bottom. That's the part of the amino acid that changes to give it its name, to give it its identity and its function as an amino acid. The top line there is always going to be the same for an amino acid. There are 20 of them, roughly, if I remember correctly, if I did my homework. There's a bunch of them. And they all have pretty much the same structure across the top, which changes a little bit depending on the shape of the amino acid and how it's being used. We'll get into that a little bit. But the nature of that stays the same, the ingredients. And then this part is the part that changes. So to illustrate that, I made this. I'll pull this one back up too. So you see the H2NCHCOOH across the top is always the same no matter what amino acid you're looking at. But the part that I've illustrated is kind of a blue blob, not actually what it looks like in nature, but that's the part that changes to change what amino acid we're using. I really, really want to talk about the chemical reactions involved in combining the amino acids to build proteins, but that's beyond the scope of this because it's chemical reactions, and I promise not to talk about those too much. So again, this is an artistic representation of an amino acid. You can kind of see there the shapes that I'm using with the red blob instead of a blue blob. The pink there is the carbon that the blob is attached to, with a little bump on top representing the tiny little hydrogen molecule sticking out of the top there. And then on the left-hand side, you've got the H2N, hydrogen and nitrogen clumped together. And on the right-hand side, you've got the carbon with 2 oxygens and 1 hydrogen attached. So we're going to try and think of things in terms of shapes and colors instead of the chemical structure because I'm here to discuss ideas and not chemistry, which is kind of tricky. So let me know if I'm missing things or skipping ideas or not being detailed enough. So this is a short peptide chain. You can see how it looks kind of like Tetris. This would be 4 amino acids long. You've got the 4 red clumps hanging from the bottom of the pink carbon squares. On the left-hand side, you've got the same square, and on the right-hand side of each one, here, here, and here, you've got kind of a converted version of this guy, which attaches to this guy from the one next to it. So if we take 2 of these and attach them, this square over here is going to attach to this one and make this blue shape. And that's a chemical reaction, and it's fascinating. But all you need to know is as they meld together, you get a longer and longer chain that looks like this. And at the left-hand side, you always end up with that square. And on the right-hand side, you always end up with that L shape. And they do neat things too. So back to, now I said this is a peptide. All a peptide is a short chain of amino acids. The definition of a peptide is basically more or less a chain of less than 50 amino acids. So again, each one of those structures of 3 pieces with the ball hanging down is an amino acid. So if we have 50 or less of those, it's called a peptide. If we have more than that, and this line gets really long, it's called a polypeptide. It's a chain of more than 50 amino acids. And then if you want to get really extreme and have just a huge polypeptide, and sometimes instead of just a line that's really long, it can have branches and crazy shapes, basically built off that line though. It's a big fancy molecule made of polypeptides. And even though it's technically a line or a chain, it's not straight. It's folded, bent, and twisted into these amazing 3-dimensional shapes. Imagine if you had a really, really long chain of these atoms, of these shapes, the squares and the circles and the bumps and the L shapes and everything, and then you twisted it into a ball. You could make all sorts of neat shapes out of that ball. Imagine taking a wire and doing that, and you can bend and mush and change what you're doing with the same length of wire. And the thing that changes, the thing that controls what 3-dimensional shape you end up with when you make a protein is basically going to be which amino acids are being used, which chemicals are right down here. So what that means is that proteins have kind of superpowers given by their shapes. They do a lot of jobs in the cell, and they're if you want, you can think of them as a machine. And the machine depends on the shape of the machine. Kind of obvious, but in chemistry and molecular chemistry and biochemistry, it's amazing that this works the same way. So the thing that I mentioned about amino acids giving proteins their shapes, the atoms in every amino acid in each part of the protein, which is going to be tons and tons and tons of amino acids, they push and pull each other because of their charges. And we haven't gotten into charges much, but basically negative and positive charges are an inevitable part of having atoms in a molecule. And what that means is, if you kind of think of it as a magnet, there are lots of little magnets attached to each other. So because of all that pushing and pulling, they twist up into crazy shapes to balance the drama. I made a fancier slide to explain this a little bit. If you imagine the line across the top as the beginning of a protein, and the colors are all the different, the colors of the heads, I made them as little people with their arms attached. So they cannot let go of each other. They're in this order. They have to hold on. And the little colors represent the different kinds of amino acids they are. So say number 2 curves the chain because it wants to hang out with number 7, and it can't let go and just walk over there. So it makes a big curve in the chain and gets near 7. But 3 hates to be next to 9. It doesn't want to be, so it curves the chain away from there. And it keeps going until you've got this great big knot. And there are a lot of compromises made. So again, the more amino acids in a protein, the more drama there is. That's our review of proteins. Now, there are a bunch of different types of membrane proteins, and this is just a summary of what we're going to do next. There are proteins that talk, that send messages. There are proteins that move things around in the membranes from one side to the other. There are proteins that stick a cell to other stuff, like other cells or other parts of tissue or the body. And then there are the awesomest kind of protein, which is called an enzyme. Enzymes are like superpower machines on steroids, and we'll do those last, I think, because they're exciting. So that's it for now. Okay, I've got a minute, 30 seconds left. So the talkers are called receptors. The movers are called transport proteins because they transport things from one side to another. The stickers are called cell adhesion molecules, or CAMs, C-A-M-S, and I think we're going to start with those. And then the machines, like I said, are called enzymes. Bye for now.